Loneliness is not
I
necessarily...
couldn't even perhaps connect with my own brothers. I can't imagine.
It's difficult because the space is for the young adults.
Create a lot of loneliness where you end
And I
up
don't
feeling
fit into
like
that
When I have hard decisions to make, when I have
When I'm in a crowd of people,
something
I think
that
there's many different kinds of love.
sort of like heavy,
whom I have very
I
little
don't
connection
know
with.
how to
shared
connect with
experience.
that.
So experiences and sharing them.
That fascinating recognition that there can be relationships.
When I have hard decisions to make, when someone bounce off whatever I need to bounce off,
Vulnerability.
I just feel lonely.
Feeling inside, a feeling of maybe I should say not belonging also, because you could be in a crowd of people and still feel very, very lonely or like you don't belong there.
I can't imagine a more lonely place for me than being in a crowd of people I don't connect with.
Loneliness does not mean being alone.
The difference between being alone and being lonely is the need. So needing people's company, I think, is how I define loneliness.
I often feel more lonely in crowds of people or in like at a big party, like at a big group function, more than when I'm actually on my own. Like when I'm on my own, I'm generally kind of okay with that.
In crowded places, feeling very lonely.
I believe loneliness is a feeling you can have even at the most fantastic, vibrant, vibey party, at the most wonderful dinner or lunch, at the most fantastic event. You can feel loneliness.
I think the loneliest thing is being at a party.
And even when you're surrounded by a whole lot of people, that you still feel alone in some way.
You could be in a room with 100 people but still feel lonely.
With people is much harder for my sense of loneliness than when I'm on my own. When I'm on my own, I'm fine.
You're fine, yeah.
Yeah.
I find myself feeling the most lonely in crowded rooms. I never feel lonely when I'm alone, because as you said, like I choose, that's isolation, you choose to be alone.
I remember using alcohol to feel more comfortable speaking to people because it would take some of the self-consciousness away.
It does feel lonelier when you are in social settings, but not getting that real connection, you know?
You can have so many people around you, but they just don't fill up that hole in your heart.
I actually feel more alone around other people and around like other happy couples.
Once in a relationship was my most lonely period ever.
But I've also been lonely being married in a relationship.
And you think, okay, I'm with others, shouldn't be lonely, or I'm in a marriage, I shouldn't be lonely.
It can create a lot of loneliness where you end up feeling like, okay, so I'm sitting here right next to you, but we're not sitting together. He was making me feel lonely, so I had to go.
I find that there's a loneliness in having a partner.
And it was when I was married. I was married for 12 years. And wow, that hurts to say that. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Was when I was married.
Recently I had an episode where I was lying in bed next to my wife and she was sleeping and I felt incredibly lonely. And I know that she's expressed that to me as well. And it's usually at times in our relationship when we just are not seeing eye to eye or don't understand each other.
I felt loneliness the first time in my marriage. He was not always present because he traveled a lot.
Yes.
which meant, there was long periods of time that I would have to be alone with myself and with the kids. Yes. I also found that the times when he would be at home, he would not be present. Yes. So his physical is present, but he's not present, where someone who claims to love you would pay attention to you.
I did experience loneliness in my life. First time I fell in love.
Wow.
So this person I did fall in love with, he was not that person that is like, come and check me on. So sometimes I feel so lonely, Me, I stay alone for the whole night and I couldn't sleep. I go to the windows and look around because I was so worried sometimes. I thought maybe he got an accident or something bad happens to him, only to find out he was a womanizer. Sure. Yes. It's the most painful thing when I grew up, I felt. And you know what? When you first met someone, you love him, you deeply love him, you always thought maybe he will change, but he didn't. He didn't.
You and I have now established that, our first experience of loneliness was with the men that we loved.
What I can't understand why there isn't somebody on this planet who has fallen in love with me and wants to be with me. I'm not talking about sexual encounters because that is something one can go and find or pay for or whatever, or one that does have, but there's not a gravitas. At least when I got home or when I was phoning once a day, twice a day, my mom, I would talk to her and it would be because she is my mom and she's there for me and I'm connected to her and she cares about me. And I don't have that. And some people say, well, but you can pray. And I do. I pray to Archangel Michael and I ask him to help me. I feel connected there. I feel less lonely. But I think that if I had enough money to do what I really want to do, if I didn't have to do the work that I'm doing, I want to be acting, I want to be writing, I want to be part of a tertiary institution, I want to have enough money to do what I want, not to be scared to spend 10 Rand extra in case I don't have enough. It's that kind of stuff that contributes to me feeling lonely. I want to go to places, I want to do stuff. Yeah, but I'm caught in this, and I don't want to feel sorry for myself because I think that's very dangerous and I think that's very unhealthy. Oh, shame, poor me, I can't do that. I used to and I can't, it can kill a person.
The couples, force you into your own solitary space in a sense, because it's always a couple invite and then they forget, oh, there's this one and that one that's also single, that kind of thing.
Being like an older single woman, it's difficult because the space is for like the young adults or the families, and I don't fit into those two categories.
I have a younger sister and she's married and she has 3 children, and I have a younger brother and he's married and he has 2 children, and I'm the oldest, and sometimes I want what they have, the companionship, the love of a child. And right now I feel like I will always be the auntie.
Sometimes I feel the outsider when we have all these get-togethers and gatherings, and we get together to remember our student days and the days in Hillbrow. Those are the days where I feel lonely because they're sharing it with their partners, because their partners were with them. And although I'm included. I don't have a partner that I can share it with.
I think I feel lonely because of the rejection. I couldn't fathom, or I couldn't explain, why don't you want to be with me? You know, like, what's wrong with me?
Then you start equating not having a partner with like not being good enough. Or intellectually, I don't want a partner to have to validate my worth. But that's how I feel at the moment.
I think it's when you're sad to be alone. That's lovely. Because you can be alone and not be unhappy about it. But if you're alone and you're sad about it, then that's when it's loneliness.
It's that feeling of discomfort or displeasure, like I'm unhappy about the fact that I'm alone.
When you are alone and it's not out of choice.
When I have hard decisions to make, when I have to do something that is sort of like heavy for me and I don't have anyone to at least share that experience. So experiences and sharing them, and just asking about certain things, advice, feedback, as soon as I don't have someone close and ready to, you know, bounce off whatever I need to bounce off, I just feel lonely.
If I don't have things or someone around me to help me or be a companion.
It feels as if there's no one actually to turn to, and sometimes even, you know, you don't have the answer at that moment, and your vulnerability just grows, and you're like.
Recently, you know, I found myself in ill health, and because I'm reliant,
Sure.
I'm the kind of person I will drive myself to hospital no matter how sick. I'll do things by myself. Sure. But there's only so much you can do. There are those moments where you're like, you can't do this. You need someone else to do this or assist you in that.
Sure.
And then it's like, shit, you know? So I think the few times it happened this year was those times when there were certain milestones I hit, which were great achievements, and I received them and was like, oh my goodness. And then it was like,
so there's no one to call.
There's no one to call or celebrate you.
Loneliness is always framed negatively.
Mm.
My experience of it is becoming different.
When you are alone, people say you're lonely. You know, when you're not with people doing something, then society makes you feel like, okay, now you're lonely because of that.
That description is externally driven, and I think it's valid. That the external thing is, oh, you must be lonely because you're not engaging. And I don't think that's always.
Yeah, I don't identify with that definition necessarily, but that's what society makes you feel like, yes, because you're not engaging, you're not out there, you're lonely. And I don't think I am.
I think loneliness used to be quite traumatic. It used to be quite something I was afraid of in a way, because I think there's a whole lot of sentiment that hovers around it like a cloud and makes it much worse than it is. As I've gotten older, maybe in the last 10 years or so, loneliness is actually quite nice. And it gives you a space to reflect on stuff.
I don't think I've ever felt lonely when I am alone.
I've always felt there's a strength in being alone that not many people can handle. You know, they always have to be doing something with somebody to feel more of themselves, where I'm very comfortable in my own skin.
Because I've spent so much time alone, I think I've not only become comfortable with it, but I've become very intolerant of other people a lot of the time, to my own detriment.
And I'd rather just stay at home with myself, you know, because I prefer my own company, which, you know, is not always a good thing. You know, it's easier to just be alone.
So I'm too scared to reach out, to be vulnerable to that ridicule and that kind of stuff. And therefore, rather than be ridiculed, I'd rather be alone and lonely.
And although I said before, being alone and being lonely are not the same thing, and I'm actually quite happy being on my own, I'm not sure that I really am. That might just be my public answer. So I met somebody a year and a half ago, fell desperately in love that wasn't meant to happen, because the circumstances weren't really optimal. He was visiting from Germany. We were cycling together. He was quite a bit younger, although that doesn't bother me. I like younger men. And also he was just out of a relationship. So I knew that he wasn't in a good space, and nothing in my head told me it was all right to fall in love with him. But unfortunately, our hearts don't always listen to our heads. And before that, I would have said, I don't need a man. I'm not looking for a man. I'm absolutely fine on my own. The minute I was with this man, I realized that that was what had been missing. And unfortunately, it didn't work out for probably all the reasons I've just said. I did actually go to Germany and see him, and that's a long story, which I won't go into. But after that, I mean, for months I wasn't sleeping. I was so desperately unhappy and desperately lonely. I'm slowly getting over that, and I can actually talk about it without crying, which is quite an achievement. But I think falling in love when I thought I was past that made me realize that maybe there is something missing in my life, that sense of somebody really caring about me, because he did, and being so connected that you can share a joke without actually having to have any words. You know, I realized that I missed that. In reality, it's a front when I say I don't need anybody, because it would be quite nice.
I think that's so important, because often you think about loneliness as like your relationship to other people, but I think a lot of it is about your relationship with yourself.
I think that's where it begins, and if that's a little bit out of line,
right,
then the rest will obviously follow suit.
Maybe sometimes it comes from not liking my own company, or having my own dark thoughts about myself that I wasn't ready to confront.
So a lot of the time I'm just sitting by myself in my thoughts, which a lot of the time are negative a little bit.
Yeah, I just wish that I wouldn't have this like craving, this longing, this feeling of not being okay.
Having a feeling that you are not good enough, or society doesn't accept you.
I feel like I'm not good enough for the love I get. And I always question if people really do love me or admire me or even like me, or if it's just because they want something. And because I'm always like having trust issues, it's hard to like trust that someone is there for me. So I think it's a matter of like how I feel about myself, regardless of what like the world says I should feel about myself. Yeah. So I think I feel lonely because I don't think I'm good enough.
Because of how I feel about myself. I don't know, sometimes maybe I feel like I'm not entitled to someone's attention and time. Or maybe, I don't know, sometimes it's also like issues about race. Sometimes I feel like as a Black person that like people who probably don't like me, and then they're gonna say it. Yeah, I feel insecure about that.
And I think that feeling of unworthiness is, it's followed me around for a long time.
Absence. An absence of self. Because you're actually sitting with yourself and you're not feeling comforted by yourself.
Before you can be comfortable with anyone else, you have to learn to be comfortable with yourself. Yes. You have to learn to love and care for yourself, because you cannot do for anyone else what you cannot do for yourself.
Always needing other people's presence to validate their own, which obviously I think it comes from something that is lacking from self, from within.
Unfamiliarity with yourself. And an uncomfortable, strange feeling when you're forced to be alone. Like, I used to tell myself all the time, like I love being alone because that's what you're meant to do. You're meant to be able to spend time on your own.
And I had to figure out how to kind of make friends with myself almost. Like, I'm not actually practiced at being very kind to myself. You're just fundamentally like at war all the time. It's like having to sit in a room for days and days with someone who's just constantly like breaking you down and not being able to
And
escape.
that's essentially what we do to ourselves
Yeah.
every single day. That's frightening.
Disconnect, but it's not only from people for me, it's definitely from everything that's around us, which includes the nature and the planet and blah blah blah, etc., etc.
Where you don't know anyone, you don't feel any connection either to this person who claims to be your father or to his family.
I don't think as a child I ever learned to connect with people.
A lot of times I've tried like different methods of trying to connect with her. You don't really want to connect with me. You don't know how to.
It is about connection with self and with other people.
Trying to connect with someone, anyone.
And sometimes I disconnect. I couldn't even perhaps connect with my own brothers.
I just had disconnected from all the other people in my life.
Struggled to connect with them.
Not being able to connect. But I just couldn't connect with anybody.
I struggle to make like deep connections with people.
A lack of connection with myself.
Very little connection.
Disconnection.
It's disconnect.
Not being connected.
Inability to connect.
Disconnected.
Disconnected.
Can't connect.
Right. When do you feel the most lonely?
When I'm in a crowd of people with whom I have very little connection. I also have the disability of being deaf. So if I really don't want to communicate, I can just turn my most deaf ear to that person and not hear what they're saying. But it's very, very lonely, and it's extremely lonely not being able to keep up with the conversation around you and to express interest when you really have no interest at all. And the older you get, the more you want to negate that kind of participation. You want to Tipp-Ex it out of your life, and it makes you lonely.
And my other most memorable period is when I lived in London for work. I didn't like the work I was doing, wasn't connecting with people. I don't know if I should say this, but there weren't any black people around.
Yeah.
So the company we were working for put us in an apartment building that's like on the edge of Zone 1 and Zone 2.
Yeah.
And so like the first Friday, I convinced my roommate, she was also black, that like we're gonna go find some black, there were like no black people working in the office where we worked. So like we're gonna find some other black people.
Yeah.
And so we went to like a reggae bar, like they have a reggae night and they have live performance. And there were like almost no black people there.
Is that stereotyping or is that stereotyping?
No, it's just like in Zone and 1 and 2.
Yeah.
It was difficult to find other black people, and then in Zone, I had to go do my hair. I had dreadlocks, and they were just not looking great. So the only place I could find like on the internet was in Zone 3. Then I started meeting more black people, which I also think speaks to the socioeconomic condition of London.
I have the need to feel understood by society. I'm still misunderstood, you know. Why can't people just understand me?
So you're not kind of understood.
Not being understood.
I'm not being understood. When I feel unheard and like unseen.
I'm not being understood. I'm not being seen. I'm not being heard.
Or you're trying to communicate something and people are not understanding.
It's like a fear of being misunderstood all the time.
I felt very misunderstood.
You don't see eye to eye with. I don't see eye to eye with.
Or not seeing eye to eye, or don't understand each other.
Zero understanding. There's no understanding from the people that are around you.
You know, my own mother doesn't doesn't understand.
Yeah, probably when I first started working, I was surrounded by people who were a lot older than me, and I couldn't always relate, in terms of the conversations that they would have, marriage and kids and husbands. And I couldn't say, oh yes, no, it's and I wasn't really speaking to a lot of my high school friends because they had gone off to varsity and I couldn't afford to study, so I was working. So I think it goes hand in hand with when I started to feel depressed as well. So that's why I say I don't know if I can pinpoint it, because I don't know if I was depressed or if I was lonely. But I just felt like I was definitely experiencing that on my own, not being able to relate to one group of people and actively keeping myself away from another group of people because I felt like they are now on a path that I should be on, but I'm not, and I feel like I don't want to see it happening if I'm not a part of it because, it's painful.
I'd say my most memorable experience of loneliness was growing up out. I was so used to isolating myself. I know I would go outside and go sit by the sun and a dog. We had a dog at home, and you know how happy dogs are, and it tried to play with me, but then I kind of kept on pushing it away, I didn't want to play with it. It was like it couldn't see, like when you are misunderstood by people, you end up like trying to find comfort in something, and the comfort that I was trying to find, I couldn't understand why the dog was so happy, like it accepted me for me. It just, because I would kneel my head down and it would keep on like pushing my head up and I would push it away. And no matter how many times I pushed it away, it kept on coming back. And that changed the way I saw dogs. My whole life, I loved dogs more than people. It's one of those experiences. And I think that was the most loneliest, but it kind of changed my life. I think that's why at a later stage I decided to go back and just deal with it, deal with my childhood.
What does loneliness feel like to you? What physical sensations can you identify when you're experiencing loneliness?
For me, loneliness feels like a rainy winter afternoon.
I don't know, like there's like a bubble around you and like other people can't get in.
Lonely is like a bit of a wet blanket that's a bit too short, right?
And it also feels like some invisible force closing in on me, because if I'd like to reach out, I don't know who to reach out to. So then you just go, it's like you're being sucked in together.
When I'm lonely, I feel like I'm trapped.
I'm always trying to figure out, what do I feel like I'm lacking, in this loneliness?
So I think it's this lack.
A feeling of lack.
It really does sometimes feel like something inside that's lacking. It's like a gaping hole, and something's empty and hasn't been filled.
Feels like a very big empty space. Emptiness. It's not located in any one space in my body. My body is empty. Just completely empty. I cried every single night.
And that emptiness, I'm afraid of it.
For me too, it's about an emptiness. You feel like your whole soul is hollow. And you sometimes, apart from the emptiness in your whole being, I also almost feel like there's a sting in my stomach. That sick feeling when you are about to almost vomit?
In my gut, I feel it quite strongly.
I tend to get a kind of grinding in the pit of my stomach, a hole just here.
As a gut feeling.
It feels like I have butterflies in my stomach. That feeling of like there's butterflies.
That's
anxiety.
Right?
Anxiety, it's anxiety, yeah.
This this heavy feeling on your chest. A chest pain.
Like a deep kind of ache in your chest and your kind of, what are these, solar plexus?
In your chest, it feels like there's a pulling or a bit of a squeeze in your chest.
Something deep inside that's pulling.
You just kind of feel it in your chest. There's a joke about having chest pains. Like if someone's broken up with you, you have chest pains. But sometimes it does feel like a tightness in your chest.
Whenever I do feel what I suspect is loneliness, it feels like that, you know. It's almost a slight heartache.
Almost like in my heart as well, like a heartache.
Pain in the heart. That hole in your heart, there's this thing in my heart, there's this thing, it seems as if it's a sweat straight to my heart. That is like, hammering me.
Lost, there's like nowhere, there's like this vacuum, there's like this terrifying abyss of blackness.
There's also a void.
Absolutely. Like there's something missing.
Feeling that something's missing, like a certain type of love isn't there.
I always think when you are lonely is when you don't have anything, you can't do anything, you can't even go out, then you stay at home and then you think you're lonely. Yeah, but
that feeling of there's nothing in the world, maybe that's bringing me joy, that's giving me purpose. Maybe that's also what it is, that you kind of just feel like a leaf floating.
You're kind of floating in an unknown place.
I'm kind of feeling invisible.
When you feel invisible?
I just feel like I'm not in the room, I'm invisible.
Almost feels like a longing, right? That same pain, I suppose, when you're longing for someone. And that physical discomfort, that slight lump in your throat.
The tight throat.
Constriction around the throat.
I feel at times emotional, and I'm not an emotional person, but because of the void that I had in my life at that particular time, I felt very tearful.
And I feel so sad. I just want to cry. I just want to sit down and cry and shout out.
Loneliness kind of confuses as well your emotions. You don't know what you're feeling. You don't know how to feel.
I feel down. Sometimes I couldn't speak. Sometimes if someone say hi to me, around me, I'll just say hi with a down note.
So it does feel sad, but I don't really give it the power to paralyze me in any way whatsoever.
My breathing gets very shallow, quiet, really, really quiet. And it's almost like it's too much effort to breathe.
I think loneliness in my own body, it manifests in lethargy, like a lack of energy. And I think that comes with the depression as well. You know, you feel like you're not in your body. You feel like your body isn't yours.
When I was 10 years old, I was in a coma for a very long time, for 6 months. That was the first time I was lonely. From that, I had to relearn everything. I had to relearn how I was blind. I couldn't talk. I had to relearn how to pronounce. I literally started over. And then I felt lonely the second time. 10 years later, I was 20, and then I was in a coma again. When I was 20 years old, I was attacked by police, corrupt police. Yeah, so that was also the second time. And this time around, it was more of a mental, because the doctors, they've said that I had if I did regain consciousness from that coma, is that I would be mentally sick and stuff, because the attack was really bad, like on my head and stuff. To the point that today I cannot see with my left eye. I can only see with my right eye. Like you sitting on my left, I cannot see you with the left eye, so I have to turn my whole head.
Well, I think it's funny that we're sitting next to each other because I can't see anything out of my right eye. Yeah. So, yeah, I guess this is the interesting thing, just sitting next to someone who was a stranger a few minutes ago, and you just seem like just another random person, but getting to talk to you, like there's so much there. And I guess for me, the times when I felt the most lonely were probably also to do kind of with medical things. So yeah, I've pretty much had operations since I was born. And
I've had operations too.
Really? Well, it sounds like it. It sounds like you've been in hospital more than people should be. Yeah. So I think probably during the recovery of those times, I felt lonely then. There are so many times I've been operated on, but it's more the big things that kind of went deeper than the physical scars, I guess. When I was 14, became blind in my right eye. That recovery.
And so I'm thinking of that moment when I was crying in a sort of uncontrollable way. And it was when I came out of the closet. And it's interesting because was that a moment of feeling alone? And yes, I was totally alone, even though I stupidly came out in matric, in a boarding school, in a very conservative all-boys school. So not the greatest place to come out. And I came out to a friend, to a roommate, who I thought was coming out. But he immediately flew back in and then said he's going to leave the room. He's going to ask his mum to speak to the principal. He can't be in the same room.
Oh, my word.
But so I'm trying to sort of unpack that idea of crying, because for me there was something of a release, that I'd let go of something, that I admitted to something that I'd been denying, that I knew was there, but that act of telling someone and not being able to ever pull it back again. That was it. It was out there.
Yeah.
Even if it was just to that one person, for me, that was a very definite act. And then this crying, which I had never really cried a lot. Boys don't cry. And so I'm wondering whether that was loneliness or that lovely sense of release.
Catharsis.
Catharsis, absolutely. But there was loneliness in that, and the unknown, and what now, and who was there that, who out there will hold me, accept me. Yeah.
And if that boy had reacted differently, do you think your experience of that whole episode would be different?
Yeah, because we would have shared.
Yeah.
We would have shared it.
I mean, I guess there must have been something quite devastating in thinking you'd found someone you could trust and then finding that trust was completely betrayed.
Yeah.
That's where the loneliness is, isn't it?
And then he came out after matric.
Really? So you were right about him. He just wasn't prepared. He wasn't ready. He wasn't ready.
The most lonely that I remember ever feeling was when I just realized that, yeah, I became a statistic. I stepped into it. I fell into the trap. I am a single mom. I was not ready for this, you know. This is not something that I chose. You know, it was never ever going to happen like that, you know. I think when you're young and you have dreams about who you are and what's going to happen, you know. I mean, yes, I was young and naive and ambitious, and I was going to be in Hollywood and such, you know. And when things don't really go, you know, the way that you thought they would, when you realize, because I still had great ambitions and I was still going to conquer the world and what. And then when I realized, oh, flip, I have a child, the trajectory has to change, and I really literally have to, you know, I'm responsible for a human being, you know. Even though I was in my early 20s, essentially I was still a child myself, you know, in terms of maturity and development and what I still wanted to do in my life, you know. And we had agreed that we're going to have a child. It was me and him that we were going to have a child. It wasn't going to be me alone. And so when that didn't happen, I was like, yeah, but that was not the plan. You know, that's not what we agreed. The plan was we were going to, there was just not, for me, I'd never thought of it any other way. There was never going to be any other experience other than, you know, us raising this child together. Do you understand? And so when it finally hit, I was like, that just means my whole life is changing. My whole life is changing. This was not the plan. How do you decide that my plan is going to change?
I'm lonely when I go to Spur and I sit and have a meal on my own. I don't think society copes with people going alone. And I've started doing that more and more because I can't cope with phoning someone and saying, hey, do you want to go to and see this movie, or do you want to go here? And people say no. I can't cope with that. So now I protect myself by not asking anybody. I want to say, I don't need anybody, I'll go.
I guess I don't really know what it's like not to be lonely. At school, like, you know, I was always bullied because of my fingers and toes and all that stuff. I know from every single person, whether they mean to kind of convey this or not, like, I know I'm different and separate.
Because of being misunderstood, I got bullied a lot. Yes, and yeah, it was as if also my parents were expecting more from me, and I wasn't the person that they were expecting me to be. So I just ended up spending a lot of time alone.
I've always been different in terms of how I look physically. I've always been overweight, and I've always, I was born with Blout disease, which is the disease of the limbs. There's a particular point in which my bone curves out in my legs. So obviously kids, because I was different, they would ostracize me. And I was bullied in primary school from grade R up until grade 7. I never felt like I belonged anywhere. And because I didn't live in the location or the suburb, I was sort of a middle class, so like I didn't fit in with the white kids who were rich, and I didn't fit in with the black kids who were lower class. So I've always felt different and sort of lonely because of physically how I look, and as well as my mother's economic circumstances.
I guess this goes back to being the little kid in my late parents. They had a cafe on the corner, typical Greek kind of shop. trying to make everybody like me. So I would give them like free, I remember Wacky Wicks chewing gum or chappies or toffee apples, because I wanted them to like me and to be my friends. I was a very fat kid and I was mocked about being fat. And I remember once even one of the girls she said that I looked like a frog. So all those things, physically, emotionally, psychologically, socio-culturally, I would feel that I'm not okay. I'm not part of it. I'm not like them. I'm not like what I'm supposed to be. The images that media was showing what it should be, or the things that I should have or do. And my folks also were struggled with money, and they couldn't drive. So look, all those little things. What? Your parents can't drive? What? You don't have a car? What? You don't have a TV? You don't have a girlfriend? And that translates right up to today, where people judging you all the time.
I was one of the first few Indian kids at this school in the south, and also used to get bullied quite a bit. So I can relate to feeling lonely when getting bullied, definitely.
I think it does have something to do with being a ginger. There are not a lot of in the schools and primary schools I grew up going to. I was probably the only one, and I was teased a lot, but not just for my hair. I was teased for being a bit of a different kind of a person. I was artistic. I believed in fairies, and I wasn't really exposed to kind of trendy things like pop music and growing up in the 80s, the things that people were into. I was more, I was brought up in a much more classical kind of Victorian way. We baked cakes and we read books, and so I was a bit different to a lot of the kids.
I grew up in a big family, and we are all very different. But I was always the weird one, I guess, in a sense. I also don't feel like I connect with my family as much as I love them. I don't dislike my family. I think I want to clarify that. I love my family, but I cannot necessarily connect with them because we are very different in thinking and values. My family is traditional, religious to a certain extent, and I'm not. I'm not religious at all, I'm not traditional at all, and because we don't have those shared value systems, it is very difficult for me to sit down with any of my family members and share anything with them that would be relevant to me, but perhaps irrelevant and to a certain extent unethical to them.
I think now feeling lonely has got to do with, finding your kin, finding like-minded people. I think you stop trying to tick the boxes and you just want to see, in your oddness, in your weirdness, who is as odd as you, even if they're odd in a different way, but you can just all have a little
enjoy
party of
each other's
oddness.
awkwardness
Yes,
and oddness and
yes,
everything.
exactly, and celebrate that. And I think that's where kind of more where I move around in those spaces. But if I find myself in a room full of people that have all ticked the boxes and I don't care to tick the boxes anymore, then I just recognize how truly different I am. I've accepted my difference. I love that. But I do really, it just stands out to me more than anything. I say, yeah, truly, I don't care to tick the boxes. I never want to. I don't want the picket fence and 2.5 children.
I'd say, I think similar to your answer, because as guys, there are specific ways in which a guy must act. Guys are actually so moody but we don't want to look like we're moody because we have to be tough. That's the box we all have to tick in the streets, you know. Yeah. So you'll find that a lot of guys are hiding different kind of emotions and they have to deal with them alone because it's not what guys should be doing, you know. And like, that's the thing for me. The more I deny myself of actually who I actually am and the things that I feel, I find that they affect me more. It used to make me feel lonely, let me say that, because now I actually take pride in being different. Because sometimes you find that guys will be hypocritical in ways where, like relationships, you'll find that guys embrace this whole player-player relationship, but when there's one guy that has it all, he has a relationship, it's working well, the guys are gonna be like, but I also want ma'am, I also want, like, you know, so you find that these are two, ma'am, you know, that's how they put it. So you find that there's like two different perspectives in which you get praised for being an asshole, but you also get praised, ma'am, and like, you know, just someone that takes care of you and you can take care of them too, like that relationship that works out. So that's when I saw about, okay, fine, let me just be myself, you know, and maybe through the good things that I'm experiencing there, they'll be like, maybe this is the right way to go. So I feel lonely. I used to feel lonely when I take those decisions and end up standing against 5, 6 guys on like a specific topic or a scenario or something.
I think my story is similar to yours.
Yes. Yeah, there's a lot of familiar in what you're saying.
It's similar to what you said as well.
I would say it's similar to yours, man.
Yeah, I feel similarly. You know?
I would say the same.
I mean, I suppose, yeah, like you said, as you say.
Like you said.
And I can relate to that, actually.
And I absolutely relate with what you're saying. I mean, I guess I can relate. I think
I can relate a lot to that.
I feel I relate with you a lot.
Yeah, I get that.
And I can share that sentiment as well. I can share that sentiment with you, I think. But you're right, in a sense.
I agree with you. I hear you when you say it's terrifying.
It's exactly that, like...
Yeah, I agree with you. I can agree with you on that one.
We see, we agree. We agree on that.
So glad we're both in the same space.
I'm experiencing exactly the same.
I mean, as in that's the thing that we have in common.
No, I didn't want to steal your answer, so
No, but
I had to answer it in a different way.
But like what suddenly struck me about what you were saying is that I think there's also, and I'm sure this is true of a lot of people, but it certainly sounds true of you and me.
And something's just clicked.
Wow, I think that statement may have just changed my life. No, honestly.
You actually nailed it to the wall for me. Thanks for sharing that, because that triggered something in me.
I'm just adding to your question, I'm sorry, but yeah, I was just thinking and just empathizing with what you're saying.
I have a feeling you will make a difference.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No.
I found your response really, really interesting. I think people are fascinating in that we are all so different, because I would actually describe it entirely the opposite.
I cannot relate to that.
Don't know how and why I told you all of that, but For me, I think it falls into my upbringing. It started involuntarily, where I was always moved from one family to another. So I never stayed. I only stayed with my mother for like a year, ever. That's the one time I remember only staying with her for a year. So I've always stayed in one area or another every 1 or 2 years. So yeah, I guess that when I grew up, it sort of like stayed with me. I never thought, let me settle down, just like stay in one place and then find friends in that place. I mean, even the friends that I found never actually turned out, because I was never taught how to socialize in public spaces. So it becomes very awkward.
I wasn't settled in one environment, you know. I moved around, boarding school, staying with my grandmother, staying with this, and that became my existence, you know. I think it would be one of those where when you're in an intimate space that you're not naturally part of, and then you see there is that bond or connection that, you know, the familial that you're with that are experiencing, and you can feel like, you know, I'm here, I'm part of it, but you're not part of it. Because I've been moving around quite often and I learned to adapt, but then the inclination of understanding like, I don't belong here. Yes, these people have welcomed me in, whether it be my aunt, my grandmother, or so-and-so, you know, into their space. But there are those instances where everybody's enjoying a certain experience, and you realize like, yeah, you know what? I'm outside of this experience.
My late dad was a manager on the mines, and we traveled a lot. Every 4 years we moved. And that moving was very difficult for me, because those first couple of months in a new school, in a new environment, it's hard, it is lonely until you can break into the social circles. And whether you're primary school or high school, particularly high school, where learners have been together all their school life, and here somebody arrives in the grade 11 year and a total outsider.
Exactly.
It is.
It really is hard.
It's hard, and it's a different form of loneliness, but it's loneliness being isolated out of a group that you really want to be part of, and you've got to work hard to get into that group.
Exactly, yeah. And like, you know that it's only a momentary. I also changed schools a lot, like within divorce and this and that and whatever else.
I changed schools 3 times in high school. And it was when we shifted from all non-white schools, so like the old schools, and then to a Model C. And I had no idea what to do. So that was the first few weeks of being lonely.
I was a kid, and I'd come back from boarding school, and I didn't come back often. I think like twice a year, and just knowing no one and having no one, and sort of seeing kids playing out in the street and not even knowing, you know, where I would start that conversation. So I think that sense of isolation, not being able to connect, feels different, right? Feels like, shit, there's, you know, I should find a way to make it work. Where as you get older, it's like, nah, it's fine, it's okay. And, you know, so I think coming back from boarding school and watching how happy guys were when we left, you know, like, cool, I'm going home, I'm going with my friends, I'm gonna go. And getting home, and I mean, like I said, I was an only kid, and it's a massive house and there's no one there. And just sitting around and not knowing what to do with myself. I think that's when I started to feel lonely, right? Like not having internal resources to say, well, you know, it doesn't really matter who's here or who's not, I'm here. And then I think that's really when, that's the loneliest I felt, but it's also the thing I started to solve for very quickly, right? Is, yeah, you can't sit here and wait for someone to fill that space. That's crazy. And then turned inward.
I have twice in my life moved countries to live in another country. And the first time was 22 years ago, and I was completely by myself. And I had no family and no friends for a very long time. I'd moved for work, and I was in a new place completely by myself, and for about 3 months I cried myself to sleep every single night wondering if I'd made the right decision. And then last year moved countries again, back to South Africa, and experienced it again in a different way because all my family's here and I was with my partner who I love. But now for the first time as an adult, I don't have female girlfriends. And it's a bit of an empty space because of that.
Maybe I would say like my first acknowledgement of loneliness would be when I came to live in Joburg. There were so many people from different backgrounds, and I didn't feel like I belonged at all.
To have a child, alone, no father around, and just imagine I was 21 when I first have my first son. So that was the most experience and memorable that I felt that time, because there was no that somebody to be there for me and the child. So I was alone. I did feel and felt alone with my son.
Getting married so young and moving out my parents' home into this marriage and having a baby, I was incredibly lonely. My varsity friends I didn't keep up with, and they went on to do honours. And my school friends, I'd lost contact with them and they were doing other things. And I just, it was me and this baby, and I had no outlets. And so it was a really hard time.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
when we were younger, when I was 5, our mother went to university. And so she had to, because she wasn't, the government at the time wouldn't give her permission to study at Wits, and the only place she could study was in KZN. And so she had to go, bye guys, and left my sister and I with my dad. And poor thing, man. But then we had to then go to our grandmother's house. And I'm very close with my mother. So I think that was kind of a lonely time. Yeah, that feeling of waiting for someone can kind of make you feel lonely and feel alone. I experienced loneliness, I guess, when my father left, especially because I was very close to him. So it was, I mean, I don't really have like a distinct memory of him and Anthea because I was very young, but I know that I went through a lot in terms of my interaction with people after he left. I got over that, but yeah, it was quite hectic.
When I was a child, I was raised by only one person, my aunt, and there was only the two of us. So during those moments, sometimes I'd feel kind of lonely because other people had like big families, siblings, and then a mom and a dad.
So when I was young, my dad used to come home quite late. Well, he would come home if I needed him, but yeah. So I always lost the house key. And the one time he was like, okay, I'm not getting you a new key anymore. You'll just wait outside until somebody gets home. And every day I would have to sit out there. And I would always cry because I always felt like, why would they leave me out here? I'm starving. I just came back from school. I just need to sleep. And I think then I felt most lonely because I felt like it's just the key, you know?
Yes, there was a time when I felt lonely when Sipho was at the university and then he wouldn't come home, you know, he was staying there. Then I used to miss him, and then I was alone, you know, because, you know, before.
He had been with you.
Yeah, before, you know, I had a lot of money, I had a lot of friends, but after the money was gone. They all left. Then I felt bad. I said, oh, these people, you know.
Then you see that.
Yeah. Nobody came when there was nothing anymore. Yeah, when you've got problems, no friends, eh?
That's so true.
But when he came back, he was working.
Mine's kind of tragic, I think. And that is, I grew up on a farm. And so I went to a farm school until I was now it's grade 3, then it was standard 1.
Yeah.
So, and then the population, the countryside depopulated to the extent that I had to go to town, and therefore I had to go to boarding school.
Okay.
And I can remember my mother dropping me off at school, and I knew I had to be away from home for a whole week. And my mother, they drove an international truck, a bucky or whatever, and it was, I can remember the roof was kind of a creamy vinyl, and the bottom was kind of red. So it was in the 1960s, late 60s. And that sense of being abandoned, I think, was probably the worst moment of total loneliness. And she's gone now. Now I have to now it's my battle. Now you don't know anybody in the school. You've never been in this is the first time you go to town, kind of. But I mean, it's kind of a cliche example, but it happened to me.
Happened, yeah. And it was intense.
And it was intense, yeah.
So my dad passed away when I was just before I was 4. He had a brain tumor, and he was quite sick before, for maybe 2 years before that. So from the age of 2, he was, well, at least in the last year of his life, he was quite sick. So from the age of like 2, 3, my mom was leaving me at like cousins or family friends while she was going to the hospital. And I have an older brother and sister, and I can't quite recall if they were also left, or if I maybe they were going to visit him as well, but I was left because I was too little. And I have a very, very vivid memory of being dropped off at my mom's friend's house, and like I can picture the driveway, I can picture the car there, and I think in my adulthood, remembering that moment as a very, very intense feeling of like abandonment and loneliness.
Like my father passed last year, and so I felt more lonely this year than previously. But I also think it's because I haven't been able to share that with anybody. Like, people don't know what to do with death. They don't know how to engage with it, and so they just ignore it, and that makes you feel lonely because you feel like you're the sad person that doesn't really want to talk to anyone.
When I was 12, my best friend passed away. She had an asthma attack and she passed away. And after that, I don't know who else to talk to. Like, I don't know who I could like call up for a sleepover or something. So that again for me was like, okay, now I need to learn again how to make not a new best friend, and not in the sense to replace her, but like someone I can connect that deeply with.
Wow. 30 odd years ago, my first experience of loneliness. I was engaged to somebody who went overseas to complete his degree, got cancer, died, and it was a very different type of loneliness. My heart was empty. Although people were around me and supporting me, it was still lonely. Exactly. That's how I experienced my first experience of loneliness.
Shame. Sorry to hear about
that. The only time I felt very lonely, it was after my husband's death. Then, but after that, I just felt I'm okay. I felt I have to accept everything. And I became normal. I didn't feel any bad,
And then I was lonely when my husband died. I feel lonely also when I know that my husband should be walking through the door and he's not. And I imagine that I hear his voice. So that makes me feel lonely.
I have experienced loneliness in my life more prominently after my late mother, when she passed, simply because then that meant that I was going back home to an empty house.
Death and loneliness and it's so, for me, it's so connected because I've experienced quite a few deaths, and as you get older, you experience more and more and more, and some of them are more traumatic than others, and some leaves you completely devastated and absolutely alone, and others don't, and also how you feel yourself about dying and death. And I think that's, for me, the scariest lonely at this point in time. My mother died 2 years ago. My nephew died a year ago. My very best friend died 4 years ago. Blah blah. So it's been a boom, 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 boom. And the kind of apocalypse on your emotions after those things happen are not sudden. They're very slow burning. And they impact on you when you don't expect it, and it suddenly comes back, and you can be sitting and you can be, preparing dinner, and the next minute this flood of sadness and loneliness comes over you, and you have no idea. And when you suddenly, and then you realize, oh my God, this is what's coming back at me. So I think death is so much part of loneliness, and it's an anxiety where you suddenly you realize this person's gone. So like when my mother died, it wasn't too traumatic when my mother died. It was actually a bit of a relief because she was sick, and so it was gone. But suddenly you wake up 5, 6 weeks later, or 2 months when you're not thinking about it, and clearly it's your subconscious processing this, and you wake up in a panic that I can never find my mother again, and you feel absolutely alone and abandoned.
That's deep.
No.
No, really.
Well, I think the death is death is not shallow.
It's not.
No,
It's not.
No.